From inside the ring to the backstage and everything beyond, you're about to get some real heat from Houston.
Tell me he didn't just say that.
This is Heated Conversations with Hall of Famer Booker T on Sports Radio 610.
Can you dig it, sucker?
Welcome back to Heated Conversations right here on Sports Radio 610. Hey guys, we're coming to you live from the Toyota Center. I'm in the locker room right now with all the superstars, the WWE superstars. But right now I got one superstar in particular that we definitely have to talk to. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Heated Conversation. We have my man, Bryan, in the house. What's going on, Daniel?
Nothing, man. It's great to be here in Houston.
How you like that intro?
Yeah, it was fantastic.
It was good,
yeah.
He's good at intros.
Yeah, he's very good at intros.
Yeah.
And do you know what? It used to be really helpful for me. This was before I was pushed or anything like that in WWE. Booker would always put me in his Fave 5.
Hey,
He was the commentator.
Fave 5.
And so, here comes Bryan. He's in my Fave 5. There was one point I wasn't even on TV for 6 weeks. And then I hadn't been on TV in 6 weeks. I come out week 7 and I lose a 4-minute match to Cody Rhodes or whatever it is. But it's still in my entrance. Out I come and goes, oh, here's my man, Bryan, my Fave 5, yeah. So, yeah.
No, man.
He's good at building somebody
He's
up.
great. He'll give you that energy, too.
You know what? I tear you down, too. I do that, too.
He'll tear you down when
No, but my thing was, I was always a big fan, man. I was always a big fan of your energy. You know, you always came out and put on a great show. At the end of the day, that's what this business is all about, going out there, giving the crowd the ultimate thrill ride. And it's something that you've been famous at doing. But you was on the shelf for a while. You know, you had to take a hiatus due to the neck injury that we talked about before it actually happened. Let's talk about that. Your time off. You know, what was it like being away from the ring?
It was a real struggle for a long time, and I think it's because I didn't know it. I've been doing this my entire adult life,
Yeah.
right? I started wrestling when I was 18 years old, and I think one of the things is that wrestling is how I dealt with things.
Yeah.
Like, so when bad things would happen in your life, whatever it is, like, okay, I had this creative outlet that was wrestling, and
Yeah.
I never cared about how much money I made or anything like that. Like, okay, if something's kind of going wrong, that's okay. I get to use my creativity to do
Yeah.
this thing.
Exactly.
One of the hard
An
things,
escape. It was an escape for you.
One of the hard things, especially about it, was when I had to retire, was that my dad had passed away.
Yeah.
And so now, the way that I relate to that, I didn't properly know how to grieve.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, like, this creative outlet, like, I'm sitting at home and my wife's on the road, and and this is actually before I retired. But it's, yes, can the boys quiet down a little bit?
It's
over
okay.
there?
I mean, that's Sheldon Benjamin. Sheldon, one thing is, Sheldon, he's not getting any airtime right now.
Yeah.
But we're going to give him some later on. All you got to do is just calm down for a second. But go ahead.
Yeah, and so this was actually before I was forced to retire, and it was after my neck surgery. And so I just really didn't have any sort of outlet to release this kind of things, and that's something I had to learn.
Yeah.
One of the things, though, but I look at it now as both it being hard, but also as a blessing, because being out for as long and being retired when our baby was born, that gave me 8 weeks at home where I didn't even have to be on the road.
Yeah, that was some good times.
Yeah, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And then, like, even being GM, I only had to go to 1 day a week of TV until our baby was almost a year old. And so that's just helpful. One, it's great as a father to be able to spend that kind of time with your baby. And I see
Time you don't get back as well.
Yeah, time you don't get back. And I see so many of the guys, they have a baby and they might get 2 weeks off or something like that, but then they're on the road, and you know this.
Blessing in disguise.
Blessing in disguise. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I like now, especially, I look at, there were negative things, but a lot of positive came with it too.
I'll tell you, man, it seemed like you was just itching, man. It seemed like you couldn't wait, like a bull, man, on the sideline. Like you was just, man, I got to get back in the game. I mean, at certain points in time, I heard, I mean, I don't know, it was rumor, floating on social media and whatnot, man. Daniel Bryan is willing to leave WWE just to get back in the ring on the end of it. How true was that?
100% true. And it's also because, so I had just signed a contract before I had my last concussion. That was when they put me out. But they hadn't signed their side of the contract yet. So this was when I I'd finally started to get popular and all that kind of stuff. And we're like, okay, we're going to give you a bigger contract and all that kind of stuff. Well, then they took that away. And then it was back on, like, so not only so, and this is how I relate to people who don't understand the passion that I have for wrestling. It's like financially too, it was a big setback. You know, we only have so much time doing this.
Definitely.
And so so there was that, but the big thing is that I wasn't able to do this thing that I was passionate about, despite the fact that I had been cleared by multiple doctors. And these aren't like my doctors. It's not like I went to some quack. These were doctors WWE sent me to. It was like the people at UCLA, Barrows Neurological Institute, all these different people. And so it was just one of those things where I was frustrated by it. And the weirdest thing about it is I probably would have been satisfied and just like accepted my retirement if they hadn't brought me back to be GM, because it was so soon after I had retired. And like I had signed up for school, I had signed up for ASU, I was doing a permaculture design course, I was doing all this different kinds of stuff. Okay, I'm going to transition my life into a more of a home life, that sort of thing. But then they brought me back, and it was only a couple months after I was forced to retire. And then I'm sitting at ringside for a Dean Ambrose AJ Styles match, and I'm sitting there. I got a great reaction coming out. I'm sitting there watching the match, and they're getting great reactions. And like, I wasn't wrestling when AJ Styles got brought into WWE, and I'm sitting there thinking like, what am I doing? I should be in there. I shouldn't be sitting here. Just like,
it's hard to sit on the sidelines.
Yeah.
So them bringing you back to do the GM role kind of is what led you to having that fire to return, right? Sitting there on that ringside.
Yes.
Yeah. Too close, too soon, maybe. Being around it, and just having that fire still in you. Feeling
it's like breaking up with a girlfriend in high school. She breaks up with you, but you still have class with her.
Yeah,
every day.
But the thing is, like you say, you see those guys out there doing it, and you say, "Man, I know I can go out there and do that. I know I still got it."
Yeah.
I mean, but having that injury, you know, and knowing that you had to sit on the sideline and not knowing that you were ever gonna be able to come back, how hard was that?
So it was
because, and the reason I say that is because I had a neck injury. I've never told you about it or anything like that, but I had a neck injury, and they told me, hey, you could either stop wrestling or have surgery, or perhaps do both. So, and I chose, well, I'll take a step back, and I haven't donned the ring in quite some time now. But how did you feel knowing that, hey, it's a chance that you may never do this again?
Well, there was only a certain point after I retired that I thought I was never going to do it again. Actually, once they brought me back as GM, and once I had that sat ringside for that match, I thought, you know what? When my contract is up, I'm going to wrestle one way or another. And so it's like I never went to that point where it was like, I'm never going to be able to do this thing that I love again. The day that I retired, it felt like that. And for the next couple months, it felt like that. The day I retired was actually very, very difficult because and I was trying to come at it with the point of view of acceptance and gratitude, because like, we don't know how long we can do this, but this idea that I didn't want to be bitter about it, I didn't want to be sad about it in the way that I presented it. I wanted to, because I'm grateful. If I would have never been able to come back, I'm grateful for all the experiences that this has given me.
You put on a good face on television.
Yeah. But that's also the truth. Like, this is how I met my wife. This is how I've met so many of my wonderful friends. I've had so many great experiences because of wrestling. Like, you can't go out there. And most people, my dad, he was in the logging industry for years. He worked at a paper mill. I mean, there were times where he worked 60 hours a week for nonstop on shift work. You know what I mean? And you know what that's like. So it's like 2 12-hour days from 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then the next day you go in at 4 p.m. until 4 a.m. And you do that for 2 days. Yeah. And it's like, and never really earned more than $40,000 a year. Yeah. And like, my dad was always a hard worker. But I get to do this thing that I love most of the time. And the thing that we complain about is we have to sit around and wait a lot. Right? Oh man, look at this. Hurry up and wait. Right? And now it's not even a problem. You look over there, guys have got video games. You have so much entertainment just on your cell phone. If you're bored, there's something wrong with you. Like, it's like there's so like, and so it's just one of those things where this life is a real blessing, and sometimes you get stuck deep in it and that sort of thing. Everybody does, but it's a real blessing, and that's how I wanted to look at it on that day.
Life only goes around once, man, and to get a chance to, like you say, work in that kind of work for till you retire, and you look back and you wonder, come on, man. I mean, what was life really about? And to have a chance to live life like you wanted. I mean, I've had the greatest, 30 years, the past 30 years, I could imagine, I'm being in this business, getting a chance to see some of the things, having, great friends as well, some of the camaraderies I've made, and the stories, man, as well, that I remember. That right there alone is worth it. But let's talk about you being back now, the schedule's rough. You're away from the little one. You know what I mean? How hard is that? You know what I mean? Because me personally, I got my twins, 8 years old. I couldn't be on the road right now, man. I don't think I could do it. How hard is that for you right now?
It was very, very difficult. And so one of the things that was shocking to me even was that when I got brought back, they just threw me on everything.
Yeah, they did.
So it was like...
you asked for it.
I didn't ask for that. And I honestly thought when I came back, it was for a limited schedule. That's what I thought it was. And so, but, there's WrestleMania. And I think, okay, things are going to calm down after that. But then we go to Saudi Arabia. So we're gone for 10 days. Then I'm home for 3 days. Then we do an 18-day European tour. So you're looking at the span of a month, 31 days, where I'm only home for 3 days.
Wow.
And I went into Mark Carano, the talent relations guy at WWE, and I said, listen, I can't do this. Like, not only my body can do it, I'm mentally unwilling to do this because I have different. One of the things that was good about me having to step back is that you have different priorities.
Yeah.
And especially with the baby. And so the great thing about WWE is that they've really worked with me with that.
That's,
so now,
that's
as opposed to I'm not on. Like in 2013, I did 227 shows.
Wow.
And so it's like I'm never going to do 227 shows again. Now they have me. Essentially, I do every TV, but I do every other weekend of live events. And then if they get the script for the TV show and I'm not on it, which is very rare, I get to stay at home. Like they tell me I can stay at home. So so all of that has made it a lot more manageable. It's still difficult. I'll still be doing the full European tour in November.
Yeah.
Which means being gone away from the baby for 18 days, which is tough. But yeah, so that kind of stuff is tough. But you're looking at the exchange. Like, it's a lot easier of an exchange now than doing 227 shows. If I'm down to doing, say, 120 shows or whatever it is, that's a lot easier. It's a lot easier for me to justify doing it.
Yeah. One thing about WWE, they'll figure a way how to keep you on the road. I'm serious. I went to him, back in the day, and I was like, hey, man, look, I'm burnt. I'm done. I'm finished. I can't do this no more, man. I just got married. I'm done. I'm finished. I'm putting in my resignation right now. And Vince said, well, why don't we bring Charmel on the road? We can fix that. Yeah. And I go, oh, okay.
That sounds good. Light bulb goes off.
And there we go again.
We're actually struggling with that now because Bree's on the road.
Right.
But now it's like, and we said when she agreed to come back, it was like, okay, well, she can only do X number of SmackDowns because that means both of us would be gone.
Yeah, man. That's got to be
for the baby
really
and all that kind of stuff. But then all of a sudden she's needed for SmackDown. I was like, wait a second. You just made up the show. What do you mean she's needed? Can't she just not be on the show so that somebody can stay at home and watch our baby?
You got the nanny. That's what the nanny's for.
Do you think? Because my girlfriend came into wrestling, not just because of me. She actually became more of a fan through your wife and Nikki, the Bella twins, right? Through the show, through Total Divas, Total Bellas. Do you think, though, that Nikki and Brie get enough credit from the wrestling crowd for what they've brought to WWE?
So I don't think so.
Right.
And obviously I'm very close to the situation, and I know that a lot of hardcore wrestling fans look at them and their era as a negative on women's wrestling. But Brie was in the ring when the hashtag Give Divas a Chance because they were only in a 30-second match.
Yeah.
And I think people were frustrated with this idea that the women weren't being given more opportunities. And they worked very hard for that kind of thing. And they've been a part of this transition into, okay, divas to women's wrestling. But I also think that I get women coming up to me and saying oh my gosh, you're Daniel Bryan, right? From the show. And that's how I know that they're not necessarily wrestling fans. But
right.
They're Total Divas or Total Bellas fans. And I think exposing our product to a different audience is always good. And that's one of the things that I think Vince will say and a lot of people will say is that one of the great things about things like Total Divas and Total Bellas is that it exposes WWE talent to a whole new audience of people. That my wife now has a clothing line. They have their own wine, And I
know my girlfriend has it all.
Yeah, and I don't think
Shout out to Farrah.
I don't think that would have been possible had they just stayed as just wrestlers. It's that kind of stuff. Some of it is being sold to wrestling fans, and some of those women who love the show are coming to WWE shows now. But it's almost like a melding of markets where it's like, okay, now we have these fans and we have these fans. We can sell these things to these people and we can sell these things to these people, right? Which is, I think, great for WWE and great for the girls.
We did a episode on our show about Nikki and Brie talking about, the advancement in their, wrestling ability. And they work really hard. You know what I mean? They work really hard to actually be removed from the Divas era. You know what I mean? Because they did get looked at as divas because they were two of the hottest divas in the company for many, many years. But to make that transition, of course, people are going to look at them a little bit different. But I think over the long haul, when people look back as far as their body of work, they're going to say, man, the Bellas, man, they were pretty awesome.
Well, yeah, and it's one of the things. This is something that happens a lot too. Is that it's weird. They've been kind of this placeholder for the company as far as on screen for people to go out and sit and say like, oh, you guys are this and you guys are this, right? Like other characters on the TV show go out and bury them without them ever getting a rebuttal or whatever it is. And it's weird because it's like, okay, they spent 10 years on the road, right? Doing all the shows, working their butts off. And I don't I'm very close to the situation, but I do think that a lot of the hardcore wrestling fans don't give them enough credit, and a lot of women from that era, because as much as that you say oh, they weren't wrestling the way the women wrestlers are now, the company didn't want them to, right?
Yeah.
That's why that stuff happened.
Yeah.
Beth Phoenix, I would put Beth Phoenix amongst some of the greatest women's wrestlers ever.
Some of the men.
Yeah. I would say, I would put Beth Phoenix up there with some of the best, and she didn't always get a chance to go out there and show it. Same thing with Natty, and Natty's a part of that same thing where she's been a diva, and now she's a women's wrestler. So before she wasn't allowed to show a lot of the amazing things that she can do. So
right now we got the Women's Evolution. So right now they're taking over. Right now we are comparing not just Raw and SmackDown, but we're comparing the men's locker room against the women's locker room, and that's going to be a debate, for years to come. Right now, let's switch gears a minute. You're a big MMA fan.
Big MMA fan.
Big. I know you was doing some, jiu-jitsu training before. I know you've been rolling around, with those guys and whatnot. You're a big fan.
Yeah.
We got to talk about it. We got to talk about the elephant in the room. Mike Jackson, a friend of the show.
Yeah, he actually just texted me too.
Mike Jackson, he's always willing to come on. Anytime we ask him, Mike's boom, Johnny on the spot. But after the fight with CM Punk that Mike Jackson had, Mike Jackson just went out there, in my estimation, he owned that boy. You know what I mean? He just beat him like he stole something. You know what I mean? But after that fight, for some reason, Daniel Bryan, you was adamant enough to, call out Mike Jackson to a fight.
Yeah, so that's not exactly the scenario.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So what was happening was my wife was on Instagram and she was doing a live thing to promote Total Bellas. And it's like, oh, Bryan's here with me. Does anybody want to ask him a question? And somebody popped up and said, do you think you could beat Mike Jackson?
Oh, that's the way it was. My bad.
Yeah. And it wasn't like I've been sitting around thinking this is my shot. Yeah, this is my shot. I'm going to call him out on Bree's Instagram story. That's what.
That is pretty good exposure, though. That is good exposure.
And I said, well, and this is what I said. I said, yeah, I think so. If it went to the ground, I think I could.
You think you can take him?
Yeah, and so that's the thing is that
wait a minute. Tell me this.
Yeah.
Do you really think? I mean, I ain't trying to set up no fight or anything. Like that.
You are.
He sounds like he wants a piece of the action. Doesn't he?
No, but do you really think that in an MMA fight that you could take Mike Jackson down and submit him?
Yes.
Due to what you saw in the fight that he had with CM Punk.
Yeah, but that's and that could be false confidence, right?
Yeah.
And I'm very open to that.
Okay.
I think most people who know me know this. When if I were to say I think I can beat Mike Jackson, it's that. It's just it's not me being oh, I would kill that man. I would get in there and I would destroy that man. And it's no disrespect to him, and it's no disrespect to CM Punk. It's the first time I've ever actually watched a UFC show where somebody won a fight, and I thought, you know what? I think I could beat that guy.
I got a shot.
Yeah. And to just say that, like, oh, I've toyed around with jiu-jitsu or whatever it is, I've been training grappling and stuff for a lot of years, and I've been training kickboxing and stuff for a lot of years. That said, that doesn't make me an MMA fighter, and I'm well aware of that. And I'm also well aware of the fact that, okay, so I was training this month in takedowns, right? So I was doing double legs, and guess what?
What's that?
I'm kind of old, right? And so it's like, okay, so here I am shooting double legs, right? So I'm shooting double legs, and like if you're shooting a double leg and you tilt you're tilting your neck to finish this takedown. And with my neck problems, like I shot probably 15 double legs, and they were still doing double legs, and my neck all of a sudden, my thoracic spine is like,
what am I doing?
What am I doing?
We don't do this.
So my thinking is, if I could survive a 6-month camp, I think I could beat him. But that said, he's also like, he has a lot of experience.
He has a lot of experience.
Yeah, he's gone out there and he's done, like, I've never done any real
combat fighting.
Yeah, any real combat fighting. Like, I've done a lot of sparring with a lot of high level people.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as a fight.
Definitely.
And I think one of the same things that a lot of people would say about me, and I will even say about myself. For example, I hated in games in high school football. I loved practice, right? Because then I'm just hitting my buddies, right? I loved going out and practicing, and if I hit somebody, I could talk crap to them the next day in school. You get me out there in a game, I don't care about hitting these people. I don't know them, right? I don't care if we win or lose. It's a stupid game. And so that's kind of my attitude towards sports in general.
Okay.
And that might not, you see these UFC fighters and you see their attitudes when they get into the cage, right?
Man.
And you and they're
light
hyped
switch turn on.
Yeah. And they're ready to fight,
ready to go.
They're ready to fight. And I've had that a couple times in my life when it's been like a real fight, like a personal confrontation. But as a sport, I don't know if my mind would ever switch to that.
Yeah. Well, in the fight, I don't know. I mean, in the fight with CM Punk against Mike Jackson, Mike Jackson may have felt that same way because at one point in the fight, he was tickling CM Punk.
Yeah. But I also, it's also one of those things where sometimes people think that they're better than they are. That goes for people other than me, and that goes for myself too. It's like, oh, okay, like I would see things that I think like, oh man, like I'm pretty sure I could.
You could do this.
I could do this.
You could do this.
But at the same time,
yeah.
Am I overestimating
and that's
myself?
True. And the thing is,
you don't know.
And the thing is, that can happen. I mean, I used to watch the Gladiators all the time, and I used to say, man, I could go out here and I'd rad tag these guys. I could be on this show, man. I could go out here and I'd be a contestant. I'd run through all of them. And the Gladiators came to town, and they had tryouts to be on the show. And I was like, man, I'm gonna run through this like it's nothing, And the first test was to do 60 push-ups on your fingertips.
Oh my God!
And I was out in the first round. So don't overestimate yourself sometimes.
And so there's a lot of things about fighting that people don't realize. Like sometimes the fighting isn't even the hardest part. Like so I've trained with a lot of really good fighters, guys who have fought in the UFC and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things one of the hardest things is cutting weight, right? Like cutting weight.
Talk about that all the time.
Being ready on fight night, being at your peak performance. Like these guys are professional.
Oh man, it's a science.
Fighters.
It's a science.
They're professional fighters, and it's not just. And you see it even with the best guys. They'll go through a camp and get hurt. Right. So it's like, okay, here I am at 37 years old with all my injuries. Could I go through a camp without getting hurt? And weight cutting down, if I were to fight him at 170, for example, wouldn't be an issue for me. I'm 180 right now. I could cut down to 170 by next Thursday.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like,
it's not like you're going for like 205 to 170.
But I trained at the MMA lab before with John Crouch and that sort of thing. And one of the things that he had said A lot of people want to come in here and fight, and they're ready to fight, right? They're coming in here and they're okay. I want to go out there and I want to fight, and they have the mental capacity to go out there and fight. What they don't have the mental capacity to do, a lot of them, is go through the discipline of weight cutting, going through the discipline of showing up every day, learning technique every day, which isn't fighting. It's different showing up, being ready to I'm ready to go, and it's a different thing to go in and you see with, for example, Mike Jackson's boxing technique. You can see he spent a lot of time in the gym training his boxing technique. You know what I mean? And so it's like, so I have the utmost respect for everybody who's willing to go out there and step in the cage and fight somebody, and who dedicate their lives to martial arts training. And so, that's kind of the perspective that I come at it from. But I also think pro wrestling, when you look at it, for me, has always been a form of martial arts me, and especially with the way that I've wrestled, and especially before I was here in WWE, I used a lot of, to me, this is if you look at martial arts on a spectrum, mixed martial arts is the most martial of the martial arts. It's like a fight where so many things are
so legal. Many disciplines.
Yeah, so many disciplines and all that kind of stuff. Well, pro wrestling, I see it as more of the artistic side. It's on the opposite spectrum, but it's artistic.
Definitely.
And a lot of the stuff that I do within my matches are real techniques that I just add I add artistic flair to simulate combat, which is what we do.
Yeah.
So,
and you got to make it as real as you possibly can to yourself.
Yeah.
So to be able to draw on something that you are, you do, from a realistic perspective. Like for me, boxing, was my thing. Muhammad Ali was, my idol. He was the guy that I always wanted to be like. So I always want to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Everybody know about my hand speed and all that stuff, but that's another story. But
did everybody know about it?
Yeah, everyone was very aware of his hand speed.
Most people.
It's one of his known facts.
Right. Yeah. I felt
five-time champion.
I was watching during your Nitro days as a teenage kid who was like, and never once did I think like, wow, look at Booker T's hand speed out there.
His form is very good.
Yeah. I was very.
Go on, man. I was always throwing punches.
No. Yeah, but I want to say I was very impressed by a lot of the things that you did. Never once was it like, man, look at the hand speed on Booker T.
You should have seen him in
the fastest working punch I've ever seen.
You should have seen him in the other room doing his boxing VR. He was doing his virtual reality boxing.
I look great.
He looks great.
I looked great. No. See, and that's a little bit where Booker and I are a little bit different. Where he's like, you see how fast my hands are, and I, on the other hand, is like,
I can tap out Mike Jackson.
No. I don't say that. I think I could beat him on the ground.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
I don't know.
You never know.
You know what I mean?
Oh man,
difference in personality, right? And like, I almost feel like you need that personality to be a successful MMA fighter. I got the fastest hands in all of MMA.
Now, in MMA, man, you talk crap, man, it could come back on you in a heartbeat. And in that sport,
how about that guy? Did you see the fight this weekend?
Exactly.
The guy who
Darren Till.
Well, no. I'm not talking about Darren Till. I'm talking about the guy who fought the Russian guy, who said that he didn't think he was that good on the ground.
Yeah.
And then he got tapped out to like this knee bar where his head is
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness.
I tell you.
And then the Russian guy says at the end of it, he goes, "Yeah, the guy said my jiu-jitsu was no good, so I showed him. Embarrass him."
That sport, it don't cost. It don't pay to literally go and talk crap in that sport, because Darren Till, same thing, man. He talked a lot of crap and egg on his face at the end of the day, man. So.
Yeah.
But so one of the things that you wonder though is, but a lot of people follow Connor's lead in the sense of that,
Right.
Connor hasn't had egg on his face yet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As far as that goes,
it's coming.
But what it is it's building up a fight. So, okay, what do you think? The George St. Pierre version of promoting a fight works for George St. Pierre, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Well, I think I
so,
think you got to, when you're a fighter like Darren Till, you got to build the fight that way just in case you win.
Yeah. Then you look like a soothsayer.
Exactly.
The greatest fighter in the world.
But so for example, I think if you already have a name, right, you don't need to do it.
Like
so
a Tyron Woodley.
Yeah, Tyrone Woodley. You don't need to do it. Although if it's a big grudge match, it would be helpful to promote the fight if you did. But for
like him and
example,
Colby Covington.
Yes.
They started doing that a little bit.
Yeah. They start to do that. I think it creates more interest.
Right.
Right. You know, one of the things that I was most interested by was John Jones and Daniel Cormier because of the very real way, and you've got this very real feeling. But I feel like a lot of guys now try to do it, but it comes off as so phony that you don't like. And then afterwards, they're like hugging and they're like, oh yeah. Sometimes, you know what blows me away? Sometimes that they break kayfabe, and then after the fight,
they're hugging and shaking hands.
No. It's one thing to be like, okay, I respect you. We just fought, even though I dislike you. Shake hands. We're martial artists. Whatever.
Yeah.
You know, but they do the promos after sometimes where they just say, yeah, you know, a lot of the things we said, we're just building up the fight. What? What are you doing?
Hey, man.
You're killing the business.
Those guys, they're young guys. There's one thing they haven't, got from us just yet. They don't know how to go out and do a great promo or anything like that.
Yeah.
These guys need
They're killing kayfabe. Somebody needs to teach them about kayfabe.
They need
Kayfabe in MMA,
They
it's
need
dead.
promo coaches. You know, I mean, a lot of those guys will be much bigger stars. That's one thing. Let's talk about that for 1 second. I know you got to get out of here and go to work, but let's talk about that for 1 second. On that fight card just this past week, there was so many guys that were on the prelims as well as the main card that no one knew. Mm-hmm. It's the first time, you know, someone's seen them and perhaps the last time. You know, the UFC don't do a good job in building their fighters. What do you think? What do you think is going to take for that to change?
So it's interesting, though, because I don't know if it's necessarily UFC's fault in the sense of they have so much programming now that one of the things before, like when I first started watching UFC, is that I knew almost every fighter on every card.
Yeah.
But now there's so many fighters. I don't even know a lot of the people in the top 10.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like the Russian guy who got that sweet knee bar with the head in.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy. And so they were talking about him before the fight, and I was like, how do I not know this guy? And I follow it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so it's like
I talk about it every week on my radio show.
Yeah. But it's like but there's so many guys, and then there's so many things are changing all the time and that sort of thing. And so I kind of wonder if they have so many guys under contract, because I don't know how many guys they have under contract now, but I think it's in the hundreds, right?
That might be just be in the welterweight division.
Yeah.
It might be in one division.
And so, but I also think a lot of that needs to fall to the guys themselves. John Cena is big on that with guys here, and to an extent, I think it may be true. But I think especially in an MMA environment, you have so many avenues that they didn't have before, as far as social media, as far as YouTube, as far as all that kind of stuff, to build yourself into a bigger name. But there's no, if you were to ask me, okay, how do you do that? I don't know. I'm lucky. I got TV time, and I just went out there and did it, right? But there's people when you look at the pro wrestling version of this, you look at the Young Bucks, and you look at guys like that who
Kenny Omega.
But Kenny Omega is different because he was given a huge platform within New Japan to elevate himself.
Yeah.
The Young Bucks weren't given a huge push in Ring of Honor. They haven't been given a huge push in New Japan. But what they did is they made their own YouTube channel, and then they made themselves into stars, and they started selling, they started creating their own stories, and they started doing that, and then they paired with people who worked well with that, right? Like the Kenny Omegas, like the Cody Rhodes, like the Marty Scurlls, and all that kind of stuff. And so that's one of the things that I think if you're an MMA fighter who doesn't have a big name, you could look at the lesson of somebody like the Young Bucks, and that's where I think fighters could learn a lot from pro wrestling, and pro wrestling could learn a lot from fighters. There's an exchange there where you could learn both ways from that kind of stuff. But if you're an unknown fighter but you're really good, say if you're a top 15 fighter but you just don't get any press and you don't get anything like that, start making your own press, and you don't need to do it by talking trash about people. You can do it by being funny. You can do it by this or that, by putting videos out there on YouTube, by doing this. I'm the worst at social media, so don't go and look at my Twitter and be like,
as the example.
Wait a second, I'm going to copy Daniel Bryan's Twitter. He hasn't posted since 3 weeks ago, and it looks like his wife made him post. And so yeah, but I think there are ways that people can capitalize on that, and especially during those times when you are on TV. Say that guy, the Russian guy who got that sweet knee bar with the head, with the head in.
That Russian guy.
The Russian guy.
If he could capitalize on that, like, so for example, if I were him, I would design a whole mock martial art based on a guy's head being in my crotch. Right? And then if you put that on a 2 to 3 minute video of all the ways that I can hurt you with your head right near my private parts.
It can go viral and blow.
You know what I mean?
Like get more eyes on you.
Like a Titus O'Neil slip and slide.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's like, I mean, there are things like that, and then coming out with your own T-shirts that have like.
Hey, but don't you think? I really think. In order for young fighters to become known in the UFC, it's going to take the company. It's going to take the UFC to be able to put that light on these guys to actually make them stars. And one thing I don't agree with the UFC, and I keep saying it, but I can let you go after this one last one. What do you think about the champions in the UFC always, just like Tyron Woodley was saying, having to fight the number one contender every time that they fight?
So it's weird. I don't.
Do you agree with that?
So it's weird because it's like it's a sport.
I want a job guy.
But
enhancement guy every now and then.
Well, so that's the thing. I think the fans, and especially given the limited amount of time that the champions fight, I think they need to create fan interest. Always fight the number one contender or the person that people are most excited to see them fight, which may or may not be the number one contender. But if you're Tyron Woodley and you're saying like, man, I'm sick of fighting these number one contenders, give me a number 15 guy.
That's what I want.
It's like well, wait a second. That means the number one contender, if you're only fighting 2 times a year, that means that he has to wait 14 months.
That's a good analogy. I never really looked at it that way either.
To get a fight. Or the flip side would be, okay, Tyron Woodley, if you want to fight a guy who's not ranked in the top 15 or whatever it is, and I don't know if that's his case or not. I am not picking a beef with Tyron Woodley. I will tell you one thing.
No fight.
I have never once watched a Tyron Woodley fight and thought, you know what, I might be able to beat that guy. Never once have I thought that. So Tyron Woodley, just so you know, I have the utmost,
we're all okay.
Yeah, we're all okay. I'm not challenging you to a fight. But so if I were Tyron Woodley and I was like, hey, occasionally I want to fight a guy who's like, okay, an undercard guy, then you have to say like, well, then you're going to have to fight more times per year. Maybe he'd be willing to do that.
Yeah, maybe.
He'd be getting paid more times per year or whatever it is. But if you're only going to fight twice per year, I just don't think it works.
I think he fights that way because he is taking on number one contenders. He is having to fight, the top tier talent every time he go out and perform. And I just think I think a fighter can only do that for so long. He can only get himself up to train for something like that for only so many years before he starts to deteriorate and start going down.
Even mentally, look at what
exactly.
George St. Pierre said that. You know what I mean? Why he kind of semi-retired so early is because like that. It's so difficult to get prepared for the best guy in the world at your weight class every single time.
Yeah,
it's like and you're not talking about it's not like boxing where it's one discipline and you're just doing this thing. Like, okay, you're Tyron Woodley. He had to fight Wonder Boy, who's a karate specialist
twice.
Then he has to fight Damian Maya, who's like a
jiu-jitsu practitioner.
Best takedown guy ever.
And then he's going out and fighting Darren Till, right? And so I thought he looked so good against Darren Till.
I think that was his best fight in recent memory.
Yeah. But so it's like, so I can see mentally where that would be such a struggle because you have to do all that. But that's also the position, and the reason why you're the best guy in the world is because you can do it. So that's just my thoughts. Having never experienced MMA in my life, suck it up, Tyron Woodley. Not calling you out. Don't want to fight you. Suck it up. Not being a crybaby.
Hey man, this Eating Conversations, Sports Radio 610. Got Daniel Bryan in with me for some time, man. I want to thank you, man, for coming on and sharing your knowledge, man, sharing your thoughts on the world of professional wrestling as well as MMA, man. And I'm definitely be calling you sometime soon to come back on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Boom. Hey, Heat the Conversation, Sports Radio 610. Stick around, guys. Oh, no. Is that it? That's it, man. Hey, next week, y'all. Next week. Same place, same time. You hear the music. We all about this mug. Next week, y'all.